6 minutes, please.
It's a pleasure to follow Evelyn Tweed, and I think that she hit a nerve, I think, certainly in my case, when she talked about members of this Parliament being prepared to change their mind when presented with evidence. I think if there was more evidence-led scrutiny in this place, that we would have an enriched Parliament, and I think the people of Scotland would recognise that. And I want to begin by paying tribute to Jackson Carlaw, who is undoubtedly one of our finest parliamentarians. And his committee, the Citizen Participation, I can see him making fun of that compliment I've just paid him. I think we'll have a vote later as to whether I'm right. I think I am. But the work of the Citizen Participation in Public Petitions Committee is indeed, I think, the very model of the engagement that Evelyn Tweed was talking about. Because to have a petition to this Parliament, you just need to have one signatory. I had a young fellow approach me at the weekend. How do I make a petition to the Scottish Parliament? And I actually felt great pride in saying, well, all you've got to do is go to this web page and how many signatures do I need? He said. I said, you just need one, just you. And your petition will be taken seriously because we have a committee dedicated. Now, that is the kind of level of engagement that we should be modelling throughout this Parliament in terms of our accessibility to the people of Scotland, because let us be in no doubt, while the blueprint for participation is a serious piece of work and one that seeks to respond to the problem that we've all identified and are speaking about, there is a deep and growing disconnect between the Scottish Parliament and the people of Scotland. And I would say that for this institution to be 25 years old, we are facing critical days, weeks and months and years ahead as to whether or not we will be found wanting as an institution, as representatives and members of this institution, in the eyes of the people of Scotland, in terms of a word that I don't think has been used in this debate so far, and that word is relevance. Our relevance. Because one of the things that I'm really concerned about is that we use these tools, which are undoubtedly there and can be useful, as a deflection from the work that we should be doing as members of the Scottish Parliament. The work of scrutiny should not be left to an assemblage of 25 members of the public. It should be the work that is our meat and drink in this Parliament. And I think we can do better at it. I think we need to up our game collectively when it comes to scrutiny, particularly of this Scottish Government. And I absolutely will. Yeah.
Ben McPherson.
Thanks, Stephen Kerr, for taking an intervention. I think he makes some important points. Scrutiny, of course, is a broad word and can be interpreted in different ways. One of the shop windows, shall we say, to this Parliament that most people see is First Minister's questions. Do you think that as both a place of scrutiny and as a mechanism for engagement in our democracy should change?
Always through the chair. And Stephen
I
Kerr.
do, and Ben McPherson tempts me now completely to set aside anything that I've pre-prepared for my speech to talk about the very many ways that I think our Parliament can be improved. I think there are some very simple things we could do to make our Parliament more watchable, more topical and more relevant. But I wish to return to the blueprint for participation, because it doesn't, it is the intention of it is very clear. I think have I got the luxury of some time this afternoon?
You have got a lot of luxury, Mr. Kerr.
Oh, I'll take every intervention.
Martin Whitfield.
I am very grateful to Stephen Kerr taking the intervention and very tempted to return the style of intervention that he so often uses, but I'll refrain from that. One of the things that is developing in this debate, which I'm slightly concerned about, is that citizens' panels become a tool to improve solely the reputation of this place and of politicians. Should we actually return to the fact that when we look at citizens' panels, what they produce invariably turns out to be invaluable in the actual decision-making process, and actually the reality of a citizens' panel, that it may well ideally hope it improves a lot of other things, but as a tool for solving what is frequently a very troublesome question, they both invariably work, they invariably come up with authoritative ideas that we can develop. Would the member agree with that?
Stephen Kerr.
What I would agree with my friend about is the fact that people's panels, no doubt, along with a whole plethora of different tools available to a parliament, are an interesting way of engaging and deliberating over policy, etc. I do get that. But my fear is that we frustrate the members of the public who engage with the parliament, because he paints a very positive picture of the output of people's panels. But I'm not entirely sure that's representative of the experience people have had with people's panels in this parliament. They have undoubtedly engaged at a level where their words, their counsel, their wisdom has been very useful, but it's not always been taken up as evidence when it came to the deliberation on policy.
Whitfield.
I'll take the convener.
Take Martin Whitfield first, and then I'm happy to.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful. Maybe about to reiterate the point that the evidence from the participation, in particular the petition committee panels and other committee panels, has shown is an overwhelming support from those who took part, even when some of their ideas can be taken, because they were the completion of the loop. They were referred back to as to what was happening. I think that was slightly lacking in the Scottish Government one, but I think that the evidence is that within the panels that have taken part in this survey and for the question, there's been a very positive response from those who took part.
Stephen Kerr.
I have absolutely no doubt there's been a positive response from the participants. That is not what I'm saying. I'm talking about how responsive this Parliament is in general to the presentation of evidence, however it comes to it. Where I think, in terms of scrutiny, whether it's pre-legislative or occasionally, if we ever do any post-legislative scrutiny, that evidence is not entirely acted upon. And I think that's a failure of Parliament, and I think it's a failure of the government. And I'm very happy to give way to the convener of the committee.
Jackson Carlo.
Well, I mean, the point I just wanted to make is really similar to the one Martin Whitfield made, and this was what we found, whether we're in Dublin or whether we're in Paris or engaging with people in other countries and with the panels that we have had in pilot here, is that those who participate will accept that their ideas may not be taken forward because it is for parliaments to decide, so long as people go back and tell them that that is the case and why. I think the great cynicism and lack of trust in this process is where recommendations are made by people who give a lot of time and effort to doing so, but then are left high and dry and never hear anything more about it, and then wonder what the purpose and value of their contribution was. Communicate back, yes or no, they'll accept that.
Stephen Kerr.
I really appreciate that intervention and the light that Jackson Carlo sheds on that issue. But my basic premise, I'm afraid, presiding officer, is that this Parliament's problem is not a lack of tools for participation, but it's a lack of seriousness, a failure to take itself seriously as an institution of scrutiny and accountability. And I think just look around the chamber this afternoon. Look around the chamber on any of the occasions, and we've had a few recently, when this place has had the opportunity for members to stand up and talk to each other about how we can be a better Parliament for the people of Scotland. Just look around you now. There's hardly anybody here. Most of the people that are here have been sent here by their chief whip. That's the reality. And so we've got to take more seriously the responsibility we have, and no process or innovation, no panel, no forum, can substitute for a Parliament that has forgotten how to hold power to account. And we must not allow MSPs or government to use this tool or any other tool to shift responsibility or decision-making elsewhere. We must not allow government to circumvent the democratic Parliament of Scotland by creating hand-picked deliberative bodies. Deliberation matters, yes, of course it does, but so does representation and so does accountability. And I'm always happy to give way to the Minister.
Minister.
I mean, he talks about the government handpicking these panels. This is about Parliament creating these panels. Government isn't selecting participants at all. So what on earth is he talking about?
Stephen Kerr.
I think he needs to go back and listen to what I actually said. I've got it written down here. I'm talking about the fact that we shouldn't use these consultative tools as a deflection from the work that rightly belongs on the shoulders of highly paid members of this Parliament. And so let us speak truth, even more highly paid ministers. Indeed, he's remonstrating to himself. Let us speak truthfully. I would be very happy to give way to the Minister.
Minister.
My remonstration is with him.
not myself, Presiding Officer, because he read out part of what he said, but he didn't continue to address the point I made. He was talking about how the government had selected participants to take part in these panels. The government didn't. It's Parliament that did. That's the point.
Stephen Kerr.
About parliamentary speeches is that the Speaker gets to decide what he has said and what he meant. I'm happy to give way to Stuart McMillan.
Stuart McMillan.
I thank Mr Kerr for taking the intervention. I mean, I've listened very carefully to the debate so far. I've listened to Mr Kerr's comments, and but my point to Mr Kerr is that surely, if following his logic, there is a responsibility on every single member of this Parliament to act appropriately, and to use his word, I think, to take the Parliament seriously, because there are many occasions over the last number of months. They can point to Thursday afternoons where many MSPs from some parties leave early to go home. Now, I would argue, when I'm one of the ones who's here Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I would argue that every single member should be in the Parliament, whether taking their place online or in the chamber, actually participating in the work of this Parliament.
Stephen Kerr.
Well, Stuart McMillan makes a very good point, and I can't really add to what he said, but this is supposed to be a full-time job, and indeed, I think, in the way that many members pursue it, it is a full-time job. I give way to Oliver Mundell.
Oliver Mundell.
I thank the member for taking the intervention. I hear what Stuart McMillan says, and I think if people are checking out early to go home, that's problematic. But many members across this chamber represent constituencies that are far away from Edinburgh, where genuine local democracy is taking place, where constituents are expecting, as Evelyn Tweed said, for people to come to them, to take the Parliament to them. And that's also part of the job of an MSP. And I would be worried at the suggestion that remote proceedings are being used improperly, because I think many members do use that to do a better job.
Stephen Kerr.
I think Oliver Mundell makes his point really well, and I'm not sure that was entirely, I'm not going to speak for Stuart McMillan, but I think he was making a valid point as well, and that is that those who are elected to this place ought to do the work that they do. I mean, I take the point Oliver Mundell's making. He's obviously making a very valid point about distances and so forth. But this Parliament meets for very few hours, actually. This chamber meets for very few hours in a week. And you know, here we are again on a Tuesday afternoon, as Jackson Carlos says, a beautiful sunny day outside. Here's a few of us gathered together talking about the workings of this Parliament, most of our colleagues not here. We could be discussing many other things in the time that we're here. And in fact, we could expand the hours in which we sit in this chamber. We could expand the hours that are set aside for committee. Other parliaments meet for far longer during the week. As I think you will know, I think I'm thinking of one parliament in particular. But the majority of people in Scotland who believe they cannot influence what happens here is a growing majority. And that really should be a wake-up call for all of us, and the relevance of this institution matters. Now, I happen to believe that last week's treatment of Douglas Ross was a defining moment, because whatever one's party, his exclusion from this chamber, and listening to the points of order he raised earlier this afternoon, I feel the issue runs very, very deep in this place. And I also have to say the justifications offered by anonymous spokesmen of this Scottish Parliament also deeply, deeply damaging to the reputation of this place. And it's not just to one individual, as I say, it's not just to one individual this applies to, but it's to the Parliament itself. And when Parliament becomes a place where political sanction trumps public accountability, it ceases to be worthy of the trust that it ought to command. And we, as individual parliamentarians, and collectively must rebuild that trust, not with PR exercises or flim-flam, but by changing how this place works. And that starts with scrutiny. Serious, unflinching, independent scrutiny. When committees do that well, as the Finance and Public Administration Committee did just last week, with its redoubtable convener at the helm, things get noticed. Things get noticed and they're recognised as things that matter. That is what the public want to see. Ministers being questioned, policies being examined, and Parliament working on their behalf. And I conclude, because I'm getting I have had a very generous allocation of time, which I'm very, very grateful. The bottom line is that this is a moment in this session of Parliament for reform, real reform, and that reform must come from within. We have work. Well, members are getting ahead of themselves. I think. I mean, are we now to prescribe the word? Are we now to prescribe the word in this Parliament? No, I don't think so. Because reform is exactly what our Parliament needs, and we who are here in this Parliament, we must be the ones who make that reform happen. Otherwise, our relevance to the people of Scotland will continue to diminish in their estimation.
Thank you very